In 1986, in a quiet house in Tucson, Arizona, Lee Marvin, at the age of 62, was no longer the rugged cowboy of the screen. Dressed in old clothes, walking with a limp caused by his war injury, he received a young journalist with a scrutinizing gaze. When asked about his co-stars, the legendary action stars he had worked with over decades, Marvin gave a cold answer that struck at the heart of Hollywood illusion. None of them, not one. That was not arrogance. It was the roar of a man who had seen truth stolen. Lee Marvin was referring to 5 of the toughest icons of American cinema, men he believed had built million-dollar careers on a colossal lie. To Marvin, they were not legends. They were thieves who had taken something he paid for with blood and a broken body on the battlefield of Saipan, the authenticity of pain. To fully understand Lee Marvin's bitterness, one must go back to June 1944 on the burning island of Saipan, where hell was not fiction, but the hot breath of death itself. At that time, 19-year-old Lee Marvin was not a star, but a real US Marine. On Saipan, the line between life and death was so thin that shifting a few inches left or right behind a rock could decide one's fate. On June 18, 1944, destiny caught him in a burst of Japanese machine gun fire. A bullet tore through his leg, severing his sciatic nerve. That agony never truly left him. It left him with a permanent limp, a constant pain that followed him into seedy bars, glamorous studios, and through the rest of his life. When he entered Hollywood, directors did not see in Marvin the polished look of other leading men. They saw depth, an unhideable pain, and the gait of a man who had truly faced death. That became his greatest asset. Marvin didn't need to act. He only had to stand there with his scars and limp, and audiences saw an entire war in his eyes. Because of this, Marvin lived by a ruthless internal rule. Whenever he looked at another man, he asked, "What did you pay to become who you are?" To him, if you had never bled or faced primal fear, then every tough gesture on screen was nothing more than cheap imitation, performance disguised as authenticity. These were the men Lee Marvin believed had built their careers on falsehood. The first name, his most hated, was John Wayne. To Lee Marvin, John Wayne was not a hero. He was a manufactured product of Hollywood. The contrast between them was irreconcilable. Wayne represented neatly tailored military uniforms, scripted heroic lines written by screenwriters, and a dignified walk adjusted for the camera. Marvin's contempt for Wayne was not just about acting style, but about real-life betrayal. While true stars like Henry Fonda and James Stewart paused their careers to enlist, John Wayne sought deferments to remain in Hollywood, continuing to portray heroic soldiers on screen. Every time Marvin saw Wayne saluting the flag or wearing a Marine or Navy uniform, he felt insulted. To Marvin, it was outright theft, the stealing of the dignity of men who had actually bled in war to build his own cinematic glory. In Marvin's eyes, Wayne's films were clean lies, a shameless appropriation of sacrifices made by others. If John Wayne represented clean falseness that Marvin despised, the next figure evoked something more painful than hatred. This man was not a fabricated hero, but a real veteran who chose to sell his own blood-soaked memories. Charles Bronson had also been a soldier, a Pacific Theater veteran. In theory, there should have been natural solidarity between Bronson and Marvin. But that never happened. Marvin's disappointment in Bronson came from how he redefined self-respect. Instead of using his real war experience as the foundation of authenticity, Bronson accepted Hollywood's rules, total silence about his past, never speaking of war trauma, and transforming himself into a manufactured tough guy on demand. To Marvin, Bronson was a tragedy of compromise. He saw a man who erased his own scars to earn money. In Marvin's view, a soldier who had stood at the edge of death and then chose to perform toughness for the masses was no different from a deserter, deserting his own soul and memory. If Bronson's silence felt like desertion, the next man triggered a different kind of contempt, the feeling of being copied by someone who wore toughness without understanding its cost. Steve McQueen, the king of cool, won millions with his detached gaze and gravelly voice. But to Lee Marvin, every gesture, every slow walk of McQueen was an insult. Marvin saw him as an imitator who had distilled Marvin's own hard-earned presence, his limp, his silence, his gravity, without paying the price Marvin had paid with his shattered body. Their conflict was not mere competition, but a clash of philosophies. Marvin saw his war scars as inseparable from his identity, a painful reminder of loss. McQueen, in Marvin's eyes, turned that same aura into a fashion accessory. Marvin believed McQueen had separated toughness from pain, keeping only the marketable shell. This hostility reportedly reached its peak when McQueen, in his later years, attempted to seek acknowledgement from veterans of his era, including Marvin. But Marvin refused. He did not believe he needed to meet someone who had spent decades copying his image without understanding the hell behind it. To Marvin, meeting McQueen would mean legitimizing imitation as equal to truth. He chose to turn away, leaving McQueen with a final message. He may have had the face of a tough man, but he did not carry the blood of someone who had truly survived war. Continuing the chain of so-called copycats that Lee Marvin despised, if Steve McQueen was the imitator of gestures, then Clint Eastwood, in Marvin's eyes, represented a far greater threat. The rise of a perfect but hollow archetype created by the Hollywood machine. In Lee Marvin's view, Clint Eastwood was not an actor but a product designed specifically for the modern film market. Eastwood entered Hollywood without carrying any scars from the battlefield, no chronic sciatic nerve pain, and no haunting memories from the days of holding out on Saipan. Yet, paradoxically, Eastwood could flawlessly execute, down to the millimeter, the gestures, the squint, and the tough coldness that Marvin had paid for with blood and tears. Marvin saw in Eastwood a master of the art of imitation. Eastwood did not need to experience pain to appear pained. He only needed technique. And this made Marvin uneasy about the evolution of Hollywood. The film industry had realized a harsh truth. They did not need a damaged hero, scarred like Marvin, because he was too heavy and difficult to market. Instead, they needed a polished, flawless copy, clean and easy to package for global export. To Marvin, Eastwood's success was proof that Hollywood had completely abandoned truth. Every time he saw Eastwood in front of the camera with that artificially rugged presence, Marvin felt that the value of personal sacrifice was being cheapened. He saw Eastwood as a mass-produced perfect product, a soulless commodity designed to replace real men who had been broken by life. Marvin did not hate Eastwood for his talent. He hated him because Eastwood embodied a world that was gradually replacing authentic human experience with carefully manufactured masks, a trade-off Marvin considered the greatest insult to everything he had sacrificed. If Eastwood was the product of cold imitation, then the final name on this list represented a deeper wound for Lee Marvin. This was no longer hatred toward a stranger or a copy, but the pain of betrayal from someone he once called a brother. James Coburn was a painful exception in Marvin's list. Unlike the others, Coburn had once been a close confidant, someone Marvin personally mentored, teaching him acting techniques, the gravelly delivery, and even the way to breathe. Danger in front of the camera. For a long time, they were a duo, brothers sharing the same rough cinematic world. But that very mentorship became the knife that turned back on Marvin. When Marvin's career began to be affected by age and the lingering pain of old wounds, studios turned to Coburn as the perfect replacement. Younger, taller, more agile, and most importantly, cheaper, without the burden of a heavy past. To Marvin, Coburn's rise was bitter proof that loyalty could not withstand the machinery of the industry. Coburn did not just replace his position on screen. He used the very techniques Marvin had taught him to defeat his own mentor. Being replaced by Coburn taught Marvin one final harsh lesson about Hollywood. Real scars do not make you unique. They only make you an old product, ready to be discarded. Coburn proved that in the film world, brotherhood and gratitude are fleeting compared to profit. When his closest brother became the mirror reflecting his own obsolescence, Lee Marvin finally closed off his heart completely, turning his back on the world he had once devoted his life to. As the twilight years arrived, Lee Marvin was no longer the man standing proudly under the spotlight. He retreated to Tucson, Arizona, living in isolation with war memorabilia and bitter bottles of alcohol. His career did not end in applause, but in a heavy silence of grim understanding. Marvin understood exactly what had happened. The film industry he had served did not truly need real scars. It only needed the appearance of sacrifice, polished into a shiny ornament, a fashionable product to sell tickets. They had taken his brokenness, smoothed it, cleaned it, and resold it to the public under the label of action hero. To Marvin, this was not just professional replacement, it was a slow theft. Every time he saw a new generation of actors copying his demeanor, he felt another piece of his Saipan life being stripped away and trivialized. Marvin's bitterness did not come from losing fame, but from witnessing truth being pushed into the shadows. He measured everything by the harsh standards of the battlefield, where words carry the weight of blood and silence carries the weight of death. By that measure, all of Hollywood appeared as a stage of liars. He saw blockbuster films and celebrated roles, and he saw emptiness. He felt like the last remaining witness of an era when heroes did not need to act, because heroism was something they had already paid for with their lives. In his final days, Marvin lived like a shadow of himself. He would sit for hours, letting the pain in his sciatic nerve remind him of Saipan, as if it were the only remaining link to reality. He did not want Hollywood's forgiveness, nor did he care for the sympathy of those he had cut off. He carried that pain like a final medal. When Lee Marvin passed away in 1987, he left no will to explain his bitterness. He left with the pride of a soldier who had never truly left the battlefield. Hollywood may have appropriated his image, but it never touched the painful core that made him Lee Marvin. He took his truth to the grave, leaving behind a dazzling but hollow film empire, where stand-ins continued to play tough men without ever knowing that their shadow was cast by the blood of a man who had died in 1944. Lee Marvin's life was not merely the story of a fallen Hollywood star, but a scathing indictment of the price of truth in a world hungry for beautiful lies. He lived his life like an open wound that never healed, a rough presence reminding everyone of the real cost of heroism, something cinema deliberately forgot in exchange for profit. When Lee Marvin closed his eyes, he took his truth into oblivion. Hollywood continued producing heroes, continuing to glorify tough guys with flawless smiles, but within them remained the absence of the haunting depth Marvin once carried. He was the last of an era in which sacrifice was a living reality, not a visual effect or a carefully rehearsed performance. Perhaps the greatest lesson Lee Marvin left behind is not in his films, but in his bitterness itself. In a world of imitation, truth becomes such an expensive commodity that people would rather steal it than confront it. Modern audiences may still admire the cold exterior of action icons, but somewhere in those old, scratched film reels, one can still hear the limping footsteps of Lee Marvin, a sound reminding us that beneath the brightest spotlight, what is often revealed is an emptiness no line of dialogue can ever fill. Does Lee Marvin's story change your view of classic action films? Are we being entertained by talent or simply consuming commercialized scars? If this interpretation of Lee Marvin has given you a new and haunting perspective on Hollywood's soldier, don't forget to like and subscribe to continue uncovering the darker pages behind the glamour of the film capital. Thank you for watching.